Socialist communities already exist, but few people choose to live in them. In this context, socialist communities, I am referring to small-scale communities, not socialist countries such as Cuba or Venezuela. Socialist communities take various forms, but the main characteristic that is consistent between them is the means of production in these communities is held in common. So, holding to the socialist principle, the worker's labor is not exploited for profit to the benefit of an owner or capitalist class. These communities primarily take the form of communes and religious orders. I am going to focus on communes because I think it better reflects what a socialist envisions for society at large. There is a rich history of these communes coming into existence to escape the capitalist system of their country. But another prominent characteristic of these communes is that they are short-lived. However impressive it may be that some persist for decades, the truth is that they still have a huge difficulty persisting for a time in which a community could be claimed to be successful. I think most people would agree with that a community that fails to exist for more than a generation is not a successful society. Many religious orders such as monasteries buck this trend, persisting sometimes for centuries. This is not to say that they are not successful communes or that new communes will not come into being that will be successful, but the socialist communities that are successful are the exception, not the rule. Today, there is not a large list of socialist communities. There are many micro-communities such as co-housings, but they require regular interaction with the capitalist society around them, so it is difficult to judge their socialist merits. During the 1960s, 1970s, the U.S. had somewhat of a golden age of socialist communities, likely due to the example set by the USSR and China under Mao. There is a reason to believe a resurgence in these communities may return with the high number of young people in the U.S. who view socialism favorably and capitalism negatively. Only time will tell. For the time being, it's difficult to estimate a total number of individuals who live in these types of socialist communities in most countries except Israel. Israel has a popular form of commune called the kibbutz. The kibbutz was established in the early 20th century to be socialist and Zionist in nature. Bernie Sanders even worked on a kibbutz, and it is believed that this experience had a significant influence on his political outlook. There exist today 270 kibbutzim in Israel. They are the most mainstream and organized form of communal community in any Western country. They possess political representation and often act as a political bloc. Since their inception, the majority of kibbutzim have evolved to become less socialist over time due to economic hardship and their inability to remain economically stable. Still around a quarter remain using the traditional socialist and communal system. The kibbutzim has proven their ability to persist and to adapt to remain stable. Despite this, less than 1% of the Israeli population choose to live in a kibbutz, and even less in their traditional socialist model. No other country has such a dominant model of commune, meaning the participation rate in communities is likely well below that of Israel. Knowing this, why do so few Israelis choose to participate in these socialist communities? The kibbutzim has government representation. The kibbutzim assets are often owned by their community and their property rights are respected by the capitalist system in Israel. The ability to start on the small scale with a large society functioning around it, acting as an incubator to pursue and perfect real socialism. And yet there remains low participation. The emphasis on the kibbutzim does limit our scope, but they are the only mainstream version of a community with socialist characteristics and a clear population count. Undoubtedly, there will be critiques from socialists of the kibbutzim and other small socialist communities, so let's try to address some of those critiques. 1. Many, if not most, socialists likely observe the kibbutzim system and find its Zionist nature intolerable. This critique is a strong one from the perspective of a non-Israeli, but does not justify why many Israeli Jews still choose not to participate in these communities. 2. Broadening the scope away from the kibbutzim, although there are a few socialist communities today, and most socialists would likely find the majority of them coming up short in comparison to their own economic and political inclinations, would these communities with their economic and political shortcomings still not be better than the capitalist system used by the larger society? It is difficult to understand why a socialist would prefer any capitalist system over an imperfect socialist system. 3. Perhaps the government around the world, controlled through the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, are masterminding the destruction and corruption of these socialist communities through organizations such as the CIA.
The ace in the hole for explaining any socialist failure. There is definitely truth to the argument, but there is also numerous socialist communities found before such organizations such as the CIA or even the stigmatization of socialism that still resulted in failure. So bourgeoisie interference cannot be singled out as the root cause of socialist failure. The existence of long-lived socialist communities today also refute this argument. But surely there are an endless number of other critiques for why a socialist is not living in one of these socialist communities, why no socialist community used their preferred model, or why socialist communities have become less prevalent as time has gone on. This leaves the argument in a rather unsatisfying conclusion. But this could also be a golden opportunity for socialism. Why don't socialists band together to create a socialist community to match their economic and political inclinations? Admittedly, this would be extremely difficult, but surely this has to be far easier than overthrowing or slowly transitioning away from an entrenched economic system of an entire country. Become the shining example of socialism. This is desperately needed. Put to an end once and for all the claim that socialism always fails or has not really been tried. Because of the failures of socialism on the small scale, it is a glaring concern for the success of socialism on the large scale. If a socialist community cannot find long-term success on the small scale with a populace that voluntarily chooses to participate and to uphold the ideals of the community, how can an entire country find long-term success with a socialist system where many citizens will inevitably dislike the system and actively work against it? In conclusion, there today exist socialist communities. They have largely been unsuccessful, either evolving away from their socialist traditions or descending into non-existence. If socialists are serious about their ideology and believe socialism is truly the best system in which to organize an economy, they need to address why many do not voluntarily join these communities and how this failure at the small scale will not translate to a larger scale implementation. Please let me know what you think in the comments. I would love to hear how socialists explain the shortcomings of these communities and what they believe the solution is to make them a success. Peace!